Hey, hey, hey. Okay, so I'm actually going to start this video out a little different. I have a Discovery Channel clip that I want you to watch first. Go ahead and just take, on the back of your notes, jot down some facts that you learned from the video. Maybe 5, maybe 10. So watch this. I think you'll enjoy it.
Nothing about the young Charles Darwin suggested that he would grow up to be the sort of man who would change our view of the world. He loved hunting and beetle collecting far more than his formal studies. In fact, the young Darwin dropped out of medical school much to the disappointment of his father, Robert Darwin, a doctor. Darwin finally managed to complete a course of study for the ministry at Cambridge, but he never served in a church. An around-the-world trip on a refitted warship, the Beagle, changed his calling. Darwin expected to travel for 2 years. Instead, he spent 5 years exploring and collecting and observing. The Galapagos Islands proved the most important stop on his voyage. Darwin observed that various species of tortoises and finches differed from island to island. He didn't realize the significance at the time, but the observations and his collections would eventually lead him to the theory of natural selection. In 1836, Darwin came home with enough material to provide him with years of work. 3,000 pages of notes, over 1,500 species of insects, 4,000 skins, bones, and dried specimens, and crates full of fossils. At 27, Darwin made cautious steps toward marriage. On a piece of paper, he recorded his reasons for and against the institution. On the plus side, he wrote, children and someone to take care of the house and companionship. And better than a dog, anyhow. The negatives included the loss of freedom and less money for books. But Darwin talked himself into marriage with Emma Wedgwood, saying, "I shall never know French or see the continent or go to America or go up in a balloon. Oh, never mind, my boy, there's many a happy slave." Darwin fathered 10 children and rarely left his home near London, but he never lost the freedom of his imagination. He wandered his estate pondering questions that his voyage and simple truths about breeding farm animals suggested. He wrote 3 hours a day. For 20 years, Darwin wrestled with the concept of evolution and natural selection, fully aware that his ideas would outrage those who believed that God was responsible for all creation. He started with the familiar. For hundreds of years, people have been selectively breeding faster horses. Darwin called the process artificial selection. "Our English horses," he said, "differ from horses of every other breed, but do not owe their difference and superiority to descent from any single pair, but to a continued and selective breeding and training of many individuals during each generation." Darwin's book on the origin of species went on to tackle natural selection. In the real world, random genetic changes may improve an individual's ability to survive. Those individuals with traits best suited for the local environment will, on average, leave the greatest number of surviving fertile offspring. The book sold out on the first day of publication and changed the way we look at life. Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection has become the unifying concept for biology. From so simple a beginning, endless forms, most beautiful and most wonderful, have been and are being evolved.
All right, so go ahead and grab your notes. This is the second part of the evolution notes, and we'll get started there. Okay, so you already know a pretty good bit about Darwin now, and especially after watching that video. Your notes just start out and say November 24th, 1859, and I'm not going to ask you any dates. The dates are just kind of there so that you can see the storyline. He published, I'm on the wrong notes. Okay, so, but in the first notes it did say he published the Origin of Species. Okay, so February 12th, that's where we're starting on part 2. He was actually in school to be a doctor, like his father, and then he was going to be a priest, and we talked about that last time. Yes, Darwin was going to be a priest, but he decided to go on a voyage around the world, and the name of his boat was the HMS Beagle. And so you can kind of see where he went here by looking at this photo. But it says he decided to join Captain Fitzroy on the HMS Beagle as a doctor and a naturalist on the ship. And so at that time, all the ships were supposed to have like a scientist on board. And so there's a picture of where he went. And you can see he's going this way. And went around and around and right there. And he studied a lot at the Galapagos Islands, right where this yellow dot is, right here. And so at the Galapagos Islands is where he realized, and there's more than one of them. They're really small right there. And he realized that different animals have similarities, but they also have differences. And so, for example, different birds all birds have scales on their feet, and they have feathers, and they can fly, but they have different types of beaks. And so, although they were similar, in some ways they were different. And so it says this journey takes him around the world in 5 years. And the video told you he was planning on 2 but decided on 5. Darwin collects plants, animals, and fossils at every stop. And so he came home with tons and tons of all these fossils. In 1840, he's working on his manuscript. 1844, so you can tell this took several years. It's complete. And I think I told you in the last video that when he got home, his wife, she didn't agree with him. And she thought at that time everyone agreed that a God had made all the animals. And at that point, they had not evolved at all. And so she was like, no, you're not going to publish that book. And he actually had some stomach issues and lots of worry because of it. Okay. This is Darwin's theory. It's the theory of natural selection. And there's his boat. There's his book. Okay, so if you look, this just shows a picture of different elephants. And at one time, there was believed, and this shows millions of years ago, 34 million years ago. At one time, there were 15, 20 different types of elephants on the planet. And now there's only 2. There's the African elephant and the Asian elephant. And so, what happened? Nature selected, and by nature I mean, the environment or the certain regions and climate, selected who could and couldn't live because of their traits. And so, the theory of Darwin's natural selection says that in nature there are different traits, and some of those traits work to their advantage. Certain beaks can get worms better than others, and certain beaks can get seeds open better than others. And so they have different levels of success in reproduction. So, and basically, if you can survive and live, then you can have babies. And I think we learned that in ecology. If you can survive, you can have offspring. And so there's weak and there's strong traits. And the stronger traits, now the stronger trait may be small, so you can hide from your predators, or big and thick, so you can survive extreme winters. And so the stronger trait and the weaker trait may not always be big and macho. It may be that you can hide, or you're a brown squirrel and you're camouflaged. Okay, so of Darwin's natural selection, there's A, there's traits, B, environmental stresses. And so if you think about when it snows, the mosquitoes that can survive the snow, well, those are the ones that get to have offspring. And so those are the ones that get to reproduce come summertime. Environmental stresses such as snow or hurricanes or tsunamis or whatever, just cold and hot maybe. Environmental stresses affect the success rate of individuals in a population in different ways. And so do me a favor, out beside B, write in some of those environmental stresses we discussed. Snow or hurricane, whatever. Okay, you want to know that populations evolve, not individuals. I can't, for the human race, decide that we are going to work out and eat better. And no, the whole population is going to have to evolve, not just me. And so the whole population, the DNA has to be passed down and passed down and passed down. One mutation isn't going to change the human race, right? It's going to take lots of mutations. So populations evolve, not individuals. Somatic cells, that's your body cells, right? Not your sex cells, but your body cells, versus germ cells or sex cells. And then, so if you have a mutation in your germ cell, beside germ cell, do me a favor, write in sperm or egg. If you have a mutation in your germ cell, then that's going to be passed down to your offspring, not your somatic cells or your body cells. Okay, life is a struggle. And so all animals are competing for resources. And we talked about that with ecology, but the ones that can survive are the ones that get to have babies. Life is a struggle. Ultimately, nature is going to decide who gets to survive and reproduce. And so, it might be that you can survive the cold or the drought. And then this concept came to Darwin in reading Thomas Malthus's principle. And so Thomas Malthus, here, pictured. Look at that handsome young man there. Thomas Malthus is the one who said, right here, just like with ecology, organisms are going to grow and grow and grow and grow and grow. Boom. We're competing for food now. If you can get the food better than anybody else, then you're doing pretty good. You can survive. And so Thomas Malthus is actually the one that said survival of the fittest, right? It says, this book basically states that more organisms are born than nature can allow. So carrying capacity from ecology, right? There is a carrying capacity, and can you survive it? And right out beside that, survival of the fittest. Survival of the fittest. And when I say fit, what I mean is reproduction. If I can have more babies than Miss Simonetti, then I am more fit than she is. So fittest is how many babies you can have. Okay, then there is artificial selection. And that's going to be where nature doesn't decide, but man decides. And so pause the video for a second and think of some ways or some things that you know of that are artificially selected, where a man decides. So what types of plants, what types of domestic animals? And tomorrow I want to hear your examples. Man can erase what nature took thousands of years to create. Man can erase that. And so you take a second and think of something that you know of that man selects. We reproduce this with this because that's what we like. Okay, populations, 4 items that define a population. In order to be the same population, there's artificial selection, you have to be the same animal, the same species, in the same place at the same time. So these 2 squirrels can reproduce because they're in the same forest at the same time, and they're similar. Their DNA will match up. So they got to have They got to be the same species. So it doesn't count if one's in Africa and one's in Asia. Then they can't reproduce, right? And so this next thing, this next part of the notes is supporting evidence. Why do we know that evolution is true? Why do we know? Here's some evidence for evolution. Or why do some people believe this? I guess what is some of the evidence? One is going to be homologous, H-O-M-O, same. Yes, you know that. Structure. And I always find this really interesting. Check out these different bones. The human and the bat both have the one bone up top, the two bones down bottom, or in their forearm, carpals, the little yellow ones, and then phalanges. And look, the cat and the whale have the same thing. And so people will think, hey, if we have the same bones, we must be related. Me and somebody else have similar bone structure or similar hair. We must be cousins. So homologous structures is one. Vestigial structures, that would be a structure that isn't used anymore, like an appendix or wisdom teeth. It doesn't, we have it, but we don't use it anymore. Kind of like the whale and the different arms of the bone. Okay, another reason why people point to evolution. Look at the similarities in the embryo. So there's, if you look at the picture, this is a fish. Whoops. There you go. If you look at the picture, there we go. Okay, so there's a fish, and then you see the picture right there. And then look at the human, and it's really similar. And I've actually heard people talk about the similarities in a rabbit and a human. At a certain embryonic development, you can't even tell a difference in a rabbit and a human. And that's crazy that we have some similarities like that. And then, of course, molecular homologies. We're talking about DNA here. The similarities in DNA or the similarities in protein. If you look at this table, it's showing humans compared to, and now I'm not talking about all DNA. Don't think that. But humans compared to this one protein, the hemoglobin protein that carries oxygen in your red blood. Humans and monkeys have 8 amino acid differences. Now I'm not talking about all your DNA, just that one protein. Humans and mice looks like have 27 differences. And so when we go to compare animals, you want to know those 3 things. We're going to look at 1 was the homologous structures, 2 was the embryos, and 3 was the DNA, molecular homologies. Okay, when we go to compare animals, we'll also compare where do they live. So the word biogeography just means where does an organism live. And this is the geographic distribution of species, and this shows you a sugar glider and a flying squirrel, both of which can fly. No relation though. Like the sugar glider has evolved to have been able to fly. The flying squirrel has evolved to have been able to fly. But no one thinks that this flying squirrel thing is related, because one's in Australia and one's in North America. They can't be related. And so over time, the Australian sugar glider has evolved to be able to glide. Same thing with North America. Why? Well, because gliding is beneficial for squirrels, I guess. And so that's called convergent evolution, where this species evolves into something, and this species evolves into something. And they're not related at all. That's called convergent evolution. And so your notes say endemic refers to a species that is only found in one area, such as this. That would be the opposite of an epidemic. Convergent evolution is used for organisms that only visually appear. And I think the best example is always wings. if you look right here, you got this bat wing, which has bones and muscles, and bird wing, which has bones and muscles. And then the insect wing, which is a wing used for flying, doesn't have bones, doesn't have muscles, not related. And so we call those analogous structures. They have the same function, but they don't have the same, right? They don't have HOMO. They don't have the same structures. They have different structures, same function. Different structures, same function. So make sure you got the difference in analogous structures, different structures, and homologous structures, same structures. And then there's the fossil evidence shown of how, whales have leg bones. They actually have hip bones, and so you can see that. Fossil evidence supports the theory of natural selection by displaying common ancestor between species. This fossil record is incomplete. There's huge gaps in the fossil record. It's like this evolved into this, and this, and then we're missing several thousand years, and then there's this organism which evolved into this, and so there's huge gaps in the fossil record. And if you watch the debate, you'll get to hear Ken Ham talk about that. Supports the theory of natural selection by displaying common structures between species. The fossil record is incomplete because of how fossils are made. You got to have water, you got to have pressure. Fossils are only made under certain conditions. And so this was a really long set of notes. Do me a favor, and before you come to class tomorrow, read back through this and make sure you understand anything so you can ask me questions tomorrow.